I'm just going to close maybe with a little bit of I've talked to you about the current state of the market and the kind of challenges, the trends we see that are affecting the market. But maybe like, what's the future of the market? What's next for RPA? I mean, we had a question that was sort of along these lines, and maybe one way to frame it is, do you see RPA as a disruptive innovation for that sort of automation market, right? Are we right now at this kind of inflection point where we're at a Netflix moment? Blockbuster in 2007 is still dominant, but its card is already punched, as it were. In 5 years it'll be bankrupt, and Netflix will be on its way to being a dominant force. While that poll's running, I'm going to talk to you a little bit. I mean, I'm not an expert in disruptive innovation. I've read The Innovator's Dilemma, like probably most of you have. So I went and found an expert. So these points, Michelle Weiss, she's a senior researcher at the Clayton Christensen Institute. He's the guy who invented disruptive innovation. He ran the institute until he died earlier this year. She identified 6 telltale signs of how you can tell if a market is undergoing disruption. Again, I want to be important to emphasize that when I'm talking about RPA being a disruptive innovation, I'm not talking about it being a disruptive innovation for your business. It may or may not be for your business, depending on how you deploy it. In this context, I'm talking about, is it disruptive for the automation market? The existing incumbent vendors, there's guys in the flow center of gravity, the existing sort of decision guys, even the existing other task automations. Are they going to be disrupted? Are their business models going to be disrupted going forward by these RPA vendors? And I think the poll results, you can probably see them there.
Exactly.
It's pretty close to a 50-50 split, so 54-46%. So.
Yeah, and Robert over in the chat had a good point that RPA is no longer disruptive, but digital workers are disruptive. So.
Yeah. Absolutely. We've got the boundaries of these technologies is one of the things, as I said at the beginning, is changing fast. So the first telltale sign that of disruptive innovation, Michelle Weiss has, is they target people who are non-consumers or overserved by existing products. I think certainly you see that in RPA, right? I mean, RPA is it's getting acquired by smaller types of organizations and in divisions that could never afford a workflow solution or to make an investment in a full-blown ticketing system. Even we see RPA being adopted even if you think about that flow box, you have cloud vendors like ServiceNow who are bringing and even new pricing models in the existing incumbents like Pega and IBM, Appian, who are bringing workflow and case management technology, flow technology, down to a per user pricing, making it more accessible for the masses. And even given that, you still see RPA coming into the market underneath them. You see RPA being adopted in verticals which are outside of the traditional verticals for flow technology, which really were mostly adopted around public sector, banking, insurance. Actually, probably in reverse, banking, insurance, then public sector. So that's already interesting. It's certainly bringing it in. RPA from this signs feels like it could be disruptive for that market. The innovation that RPA brings is not as good as existing products as judged by historical measures of performance. I mean, this is probably the absolutely true. Certainly, if you go back 5 years, almost all of the workflow and automation vendors were completely dismissive of RPA, and judged by historical measures of performance. Again, around that flow vendor center of gravity, the historical measures of performance is it increasing the end-to-end performance of the entire value chain? Workflow technologies are designed around hitting those SLAs, but RPA is not focused on hitting the SLA across your whole value chain. It's focused on automating and saving you time and effort in one step of the process. Judged by historical measure of performance, the way those flow vendors are framing the automation space, framing their market positioning, definitely RPA was not considered to be as good as those products. Simpler, more convenient, more affordable. I mean, again, this could be slightly controversial. I've given it the green tick. I think, we do see it being adopted. I mean, I was talking, I was at an RPA networking event last year, and I was talking to a guy who ran a chain of funeral homes and was a really successful, a really happy RPA UiPath customer. And those aren't the kind of use cases. I mean, and he didn't go out and get an expensive consultancy. He bought the software and he implemented it himself. He had only like 3 or 4 bucks, but he was super excited about it, and happy. Those are never customers you'd see around flow automation use cases, right? Is a technology enabler that can carry the new value proposition up market. I mean, certainly Dan demonstrated, I talked about sort of how AI is coming into the RPA space. The RPA vendors are picking up that technology. And I think, this is, I've given it the amber arrows, the maybe arrows. I don't think it's clear that it's clear that the decision and flow use cases are becoming easier to implement. They're being moved closer to task. Those lines are being blurred between some of those categories, which were really good, stark differentiations 2-3 years ago. They're being blurred a bit today by the way the technology is developing. What's not clear about this is whether RPA is going to be the winner, right? On sort of these things like intelligent data document processing, it's not obvious that UiPath Document Comprehend, Blue Prism, AA's tooling is going to be the best tooling on the market, or whether the technology that AWS or Azure brings out, or IBM Watson brings out, or something else allows you to, or one of the legacy data, like data and scanning processors become better. So while these lines are blurring and the way the technology is moving is changing, what's not clear about this is whether RPA is going to win from that market disruption. Is the technology paired to the business model? So again, this is Netflix being the banner of this. They first moved DVDs. You don't have to go to the store. They mailed them to you, then went to streaming, right? Is there a business model innovation that allowed you to move, I mean, inside that Netflix Blockbuster example, even when they were mailing you a DVD, they were doing it with a subscription business model, as opposed to you buy for every DVD you rent, like Blockbuster did it. And I give this the Red Cross. I mean, when you look at the RPA industry, the commercial models tend to be more term license than perpetual licenses, and some of the other areas of enterprise software. But they're enterprise software business model, right? You're buying a piece of enterprise software. You can, within an existing model. There's not much inside there that strikes me as being a sustainable business model innovation that changes that's going to change the way other pieces of this technology are acquired. And the existing providers are motivated to ignore the new innovation, and they're not threatened by it. Again, I mean, that's certainly what we saw going back. I mean, the only existing flow vendor that really went out and brought RPA into their product portfolio at a very early stage was Pega. They acquired OpenSpan in April 2016, and it's been a sort of a key pillar for their strategy. They, other than that OpenSpan acquisition, by and large, they let the RPA vendors grow to a point where they were probably too big and too well funded to buy them, and then ended up partnering with them. And now in the current world, and sort of something, if you read about this space, this is again a graphic from the Everest Group. You now see the incumbents in that flow technology, the area of the market that's potentially a target, being disrupted. You see them now going out and acquiring almost defensively. So you see quite a good wave of acquisitions in the RPA space over the last sort of 12 to 18 months. And again, Highland being sort of a known but sort of a not big name RPA or BPM vendor, not only bought Another Monday but also bought Alfresco, so a document management system. So you see even within the flow space, you see more consolidation being driven. So that's sort of, and so I mean, from that scorecard, I guess, there's not a clear answer that says, yes, this is absolutely disruptive innovation, all of the automation space. It's obviously too early to tell, and I don't have a crystal ball. But I think there's enough signs, there's enough indications sort of in this graph, that RPA is certainly going to change the market, right? A lot of the technology innovation, a lot of the fast-moving pieces, the fast-growing pieces of the market is around this task in this RPA space. And that means it's important, right? Even if it proves out in 5 years that it's not a proper disruptive innovation as Clayton Christensen and the academics define it, it's still an important space as business and organization leaders that we need to look at, we need to be aware of, we need to understand. And so I've talked a lot about the theory, the market dynamics, but maybe I wanted to leave you with a couple final thoughts about how to get started, right? So, or if you are started, maybe some ideas about where to go. Like, what is all this categorization? What does this marketing big picture mean? And the first thing I'd say is, and we've mentioned this throughout, the pandemic makes automation more important. I mean, this is from Horses for Sources, a graphic. It comes from sort of an earlier stage of the pandemic, but still, I mean, the most recent research that we're publishing looks, and the survey, follow-up surveys look pretty much like this. Process automation is one of the spaces where they really expect, people are expecting 54% to increase their investment, including the RPA space. 38% are holding their investment. So even in these troubled times, with all of the economic uncertainty that 2020 has brought us all in our business, automation is a space where people are increasing or doubling their bets, are expecting to in this year. So, so how do you do that? Well, the first thing, I have a customer, they famously told me one time, he wants to remain nameless, but said, we're agile in development, but waterfall and everything else. And the first thing I'd say from a BP3 perspective is you need to be agile in discovery. So you need to be agile in the way you think about your use cases, how you find your use cases. If your development model, if RPA lets you build bots in weeks, some of the panelists were talking about getting bots live in days when they had changing regulatory circumstances. If finding use cases and getting bots approved for development takes you months, then you're not getting the business agility, you're not getting the business outcomes, you're not getting the speed that you need to be getting. So this model is designed to help you find a faster way to get that done. How do you do it? It's not, it's the rigorous application of common sense. It's got a couple of pieces which I think are, I'll call out, which I think are important nuances. Identify the opportunities. How do you do it? You have meetings with stakeholders, old school, right? Process discovery. You look at data and you get a list. Just put them all in a spreadsheet. Create an opportunity register. You can see it in the upper right there. And then just go through and assess the business value. You can do it old-fashioned style, post-it notes. Ask the business stakeholders what the biggest and most exciting opportunities are, high, medium, and low, and put them in rank order. When you have them in rank order, categorize them. So is it a task automation? Is it a flow estimate? If you think it's and that categorization step, first of all, starts to tell you what kind of technology you can use to solve the problem. But the second thing is, what you'll find is that you'll come up with a use case and you'll want to write their hybrid, because it's more than one kind of tech. It's more than one automation. And if it's hybrid, it probably means you can break it down into two use cases and you can make separate investment decisions on both of them. And that's sort of an important way of decomposing the big problems, making them smaller problems so you can solve them fast. And you can get more agile all the way through your process. The third step is absolutely critical. So when you go through the second step, assess the business value, take the top 2 or 3 use cases. And when you find the top 2 or 3 use cases, model them out. Don't model them in minute detail. Model them, time box it at 2 to 4 hours, one person with an SME. At the back of it, have a process model. This is such an important step, right? Because the process model, when you are using RPA, using any type of automation, what you're doing is applying technology to a people process. By modeling the opportunity at that high level, getting that quick view, you can build scope. So you can have business and IT agree consensus. This is what we're going to invest in. It can show you all the downstream and upstream implications. So this notion in the questions, are we bottlenecking the downstream step? Are we in danger of doing that? If you model the opportunities, you'll be able to figure it out. And finally, when you model the opportunities, your IT team, your automation developers, BP3, we can come in and we can give you a high, medium, and low probably implementation complexity. And so we run this and then look at the results on this implementation complexity and decide We've done really quick high wins. We've done, after we run this cycle, and in 1 week we try to come out with 5 or 6 use cases that were identified by the business as being high business value, and we've tried to get modeled them and told you whether they're high, medium, and low implementation complexity. In a week, you can get to that meeting. You can have a second meeting and say, this is what we found. Do you want us to go for, to validate the business case and to go for a dev estimate on these top use cases? Or do you want us to go look at 5 new use cases? And this pinwheel is a very easy way to think about and run use case identification, so you can find places for automation, narrow them down, categorize them, make sure they're tasks, make sure they're the right kind of tasks for RPA, and filter them down, get them in the green zone, and make the investments. Hopefully what it lets you do, or challenges you to do, is to be less waterfall in the way you find use cases, the way you think about making these decisions, and be able to get more agile about it. And the final guiding principle, this is the rigorous application of common sense. We're consultants at BP3, so we like a little bit of a 4x4 quadrant. Map your opportunities. When you're making the decision about where to make and what technology to invest in, map the quick win, map them on a matrix. Here I've put business value on the bottom, implementation complexity, and try to start with things in the green zone. And if things are in the red zone, I put the euphemism, use design thinking. Really come back Friday, have Andy Baziri's team help you redesign your enterprise experience. Because if you're looking at something in the red zone and you think you should be investing in it, it probably will never achieve the proper ROI the way you're framing the problem today. To make those investments in that red zone, you need to reframe the problem in a new way, and that's what design thinking is all about. Andy will talk to you about it on Friday. It's a really useful, this is a really simple visual. We find it really useful even when we come into customers and they're like, we have tons of use cases, where do we start? We start by putting them on this matrix, and then that, a lot of times, the path becomes obvious. And that's all I have. There's some questions, I know. My final thought, I guess I'd leave you guys with, is not every organization should adopt RPA. I hopefully gave you some ideas about market trends, use cases. Dan showed you the art of the possible. The panel talked to you about their experience, where they're getting success and their challenges. But given the trends and the growth and the kind of investment that's flowing into the RPA part of the automation space, given the importance and the number of automation investments that your competitors are talking about making in the market, I would certainly say that not every organization should adopt RPA, but every organization should understand why they have or haven't, right? If you aren't looking at it and understanding these technology dynamics, what RPA is doing for your competitors, what it could do for you, you probably need to think about that and where you fit in the market. Thank you, and I guess I'm happy to hang out for more questions. Krista, I don't know.
Yeah, so there's a good question that came in about your assessing business value. Is there good practices for doing that? Do you have good practices for assessing and accessing that business value?
So when we go in and assess the business value matrix as BP3, what I tend to lead with is what is your organization's business objectives? How do they assess business value, and what do they think is important? What I'd say is, around an RPA investment, an RPA investment decision or finding RPA use cases is not going to be about strategic realignment of your whole business. If you need, we have people, certainly we can talk to you about how to realign your target operating models and how to do the end-to-end value chain flow. But really, when we do most of that business case analysis, we start with the way you think about business cases. So we'll start with guided questions. Are you looking to adopt RPA because you have regulatory and compliance problems? Are you looking at automation because you're missing SLAs? Do you just have too much headcount in your office, in one of your offices, and you want to retrain them and move them? Do you have growth? Is your revenue line growing strongly, but you want to hold your headcount constant in your strategic plan? And based on those things, we'll be able to work backwards. Again, to what kinds of metrics and what kinds of things, what kinds of automation investments are going to be right for you.
Okay. The last question we got was about open text. So this was with regards to your
Yeah.
timeline.
Definitely place OpenText in this space. I mean, they bought basically every .NET vendor in the Flow space, and consolidated them. They haven't consolidated the technology, but they've consolidated them all under the OpenText brand, I think. So yeah, I mean, they're definitely a Flow vendor. Most of the ECM document management work systems have workflow that let them operate in the Flow space as well. So.
Thank you, Brack, today for going through everything. I think there was some overwhelmingly great response. Do you have any last words before we head out?
No, thanks everyone for coming, and really thanks to our panelists and Dan. I mean, as I said, doing a live demo is brave, and I mean the panelists really they've got the stories that we all want to hear, so it's really great to have them here.
Yeah. So thank you to all of our panelists. And Brack, we will see you guys tomorrow for Process Automation with Scott Francis as our host. Big day.
Thanks.